In the quiet town of Michigan, a chilling mystery had haunted residents for years: the disappearance of a young woman whose absence left a community on edge. Her story lingered in whispers, footprints in the snow, and unanswered questions that refused to fade. But what if the truth had been closer than anyone imagined? What if a single discovery could finally unravel a decade of secrets? Join us as we uncover the shocking details of the Michigan 2010 cold case, a tale of hidden evidence, relentless investigation, and the pursuit of justice that would shake a town to its core. The last call that vanished in the snow. The night started like any other in the small Michigan town, with snowflakes drifting silently under the weak glow of streetlights. Few imagined that one ordinary evening would leave a scar that lasted 10 years. The victim, a young woman in her 20s, had spoken to a friend just minutes before disappearing. That phone call, short and seemingly mundane, would become the last thread investigators could cling to. Local residents remember the unusual quiet that fell over the neighborhood that night. Dogs didn't bark, and the wind carried an almost eerie stillness across frozen lawns. Neighbors would later recount seeing shadows flit past windows, shapes too ambiguous to confirm, but enough to spark unease. Every detail, no matter how small, would later be scrutinized for hidden clues. The victim's phone records told a story that contradicted her calm words during that last call. She had dialed a number that wasn't saved in her contacts, leaving detectives to wonder who had been on the other end. A brief conversation, possibly benign, now seemed loaded with silent urgency. That single connection, lost in the frozen night, became a haunting puzzle that demanded attention. Investigators quickly discovered that the town's snowplows had missed clearing one alley near her apartment. Tracks in the untouched snow suggested movement, but they led nowhere conclusive. Forensic teams would later return repeatedly, hoping to find faint impressions that could reveal the identity of someone who had crossed her path. Yet the trail faded as swiftly as the winter sun. Family members described the last call differently in interviews, each recollection tinted by grief and the passage of time. Her mother remembered a subtle nervousness in her voice, while a close friend insisted the tone was cheerful and ordinary. This contrast would become emblematic of the case. The more details emerged, the less certain anyone could be about what truly happened. The community, initially filled with concern, soon slipped into fear. Rumors spread faster than the snow drifted, suggesting motives that seemed impossible, yet chillingly plausible. Every unfamiliar face or late-night visitor became a suspect in the imagination of residents, and small-town gossip threatened to overwhelm facts. Yet law enforcement remained determined to separate conjecture from reality. Technological limitations of 2010 complicated the search. GPS data was less precise, and smartphones lacked the advanced tracking features that would later become routine. Investigators were left to rely on fragmented information: cell tower pings, spotty surveillance footage, and the memories of those who saw her last. Each lead offered a glimmer of hope, then faded, creating a sense of mounting frustration. Forensics revealed traces of her belongings outside her apartment, scattered items that suggested a struggle. Yet no eyewitnesses came forward. The chilling possibility that someone had intentionally erased themselves from the scene weighed heavily on the case. Every discarded glove, every disturbed patch of snow became a potential key to unlocking a decade-old mystery. The night's cold had preserved more than the snow. It had frozen uncertainty in place, leaving investigators and the community alike trapped in a liminal space between grief and suspicion. Questions about who, why, and how were left unanswered, each passing winter reminding the town that justice remained elusive. As hours turned into days, the significance of that last call grew. Phone analysts mapped the precise timing of every ring, every ping from nearby towers, searching for anomalies that could pinpoint her location. Even tiny irregularities held the promise of revealing a hidden path, the invisible thread leading to the truth. The emotional toll on her family was immense. Each day without answers deepened wounds, each winter reminding them of what was lost. Support from neighbors was well-meaning, but only partially comforting. The void left by the unanswered call seemed insurmountable. That sense of helplessness became a shadow that followed investigators as closely as grief followed her loved ones. Law enforcement never stopped tracing leads, revisiting old evidence, and questioning anyone connected to the case. The persistence of detectives, combined with advances in forensic science, would eventually transform a dead end into a breakthrough. The frozen night, once a symbol of despair, was about to yield secrets hidden beneath layers of time and snow. The last call was more than a missed conversation. It was the opening of a mystery that would take a decade to unfold. The snow that blanketed the town became a silent witness, guarding truths that only the patient and meticulous could uncover. Could that simple, fleeting phone call hold the key to a chilling mystery buried for 10 years? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. Footprints into the darkness. Snow had buried the town in a blanket of silence, yet beneath its pristine surface, secrets were stirring. Investigators returned to the alley near the victim's apartment, now convinced that footprints frozen into the snow could tell a story the witnesses could not. Each impression was carefully photographed and measured, forming a map of movements that hinted at someone moving with intent rather than panic. The first footprints led toward a side street that, on a normal night, would have seen little traffic. Investigators noted the depth of each step, the spacing between them, and the subtle scuffs where boots had dragged across ice. These details suggested a figure who was deliberate yet cautious, someone who knew the layout of the neighborhood intimately. In the surrounding yards, faint impressions indicated that the path had not been taken alone. Smaller, erratic prints suggested a struggle, a sudden shift from careful pacing to frantic movement. Snow, normally impartial, now acted as a silent witness to the events of that night, preserving a narrative that words could not convey. A street lamp flickered intermittently above the scene, casting long shadows over the footprints. For detectives, it was both a visual aid and a haunting reminder of the darkness that had swallowed the young woman. Every shadow, every glint on ice became a puzzle piece in a scene that refused to speak plainly. Residents who had ventured outside that night recalled seeing a lone figure moving against the wind. Their memories were fragmented, some insisting the person carried something, others sure it was empty hands. Decades later, these recollections would be scrutinized alongside forensic evidence, each piece evaluated for its reliability. The tracks led to a small wooded area behind the apartment complex. Investigators hypothesized that this path had been chosen to avoid prying eyes. Branches were bent, snow clung to bark in clumps where someone had brushed past, and a faint indentation suggested the weight of a body or object had disturbed the ground. The forest became both a hiding place and a graveyard of secrets. Nearby, a discarded glove was found, half buried in the snow. Its owner was unknown, but forensic teams recognized its potential significance. Fibers were collected, photographed, and later analyzed, each strand holding the possibility of linking a suspect to the scene. Even something as ordinary as a glove could become extraordinary in the context of this investigation. As hours turned into days, investigators noticed patterns in the snow that initially seemed random. Tiny disturbances revealed moments of hesitation, shifts in direction, and traces of someone moving backward as if retracing steps. The human element became evident. The perpetrator had acted with caution, but not perfection. These small errors would prove crucial later. Technological limitations still challenged the team. Street cameras provided grainy footage, barely enough to confirm a shadow past the alley. Yet every pixel was examined, every timestamp logged. Analysts overlaid footage with the footprints, attempting to synchronize movements, even as the night refused to reveal its full story. Witness interviews added layers of complexity. One neighbor recalled a sound she described as muffled voices arguing, Another insisted she heard nothing beyond the wind. Conflicting accounts initially frustrated the investigation, but each perspective eventually contributed to a fuller, more nuanced picture of that fateful evening. Snow drifted over the evidence with each passing day, threatening to erase the story written in footprints. Law enforcement had to act quickly, carefully documenting, preserving, and interpreting before the elements claimed the final word. The cold, which had initially preserved clues, now became a subtle adversary, demanding diligence from the team. The victim's movements earlier that night also came under scrutiny. Security footage from a nearby store suggested she had left later than originally reported, moving with purpose along a path that intersected with the footprints discovered later. Every new piece of data tightened the web of events, revealing moments where timing, location, and opportunity converged. Even in the quiet, investigators felt a presence in the snow-covered streets. Whether it was the memory of the missing woman or the lingering influence of the unknown figure who had crossed her path, the sensation of being watched was pervasive. The footprints were not just marks on snow, they were echoes of human intention frozen in place, whispering the truth of that night to anyone determined enough to listen. The night's darkness, once an obstacle, had become a storyteller. It held the path, the choices, and the missteps of a person who had ventured into unknown territory with fatal consequences. Snow, shadows, and footprints combined to form a trail of clues that, though silent, refused to be ignored. What secrets might those faint footprints reveal about the person who disappeared into the shadows? Come with us to explore the hidden corners of the story. Whispers that turned a town cold. The small Michigan town had always been tight-knit, but the night the victim disappeared, ordinary whispers began to fester into fear. Conversations that had once been mundane took on a sharper edge as neighbors speculated about the unknown. Every creak of a door, every late-night footstep became evidence in the court of collective anxiety. Rumors traveled faster than the investigators could track. Some claimed the ex-boyfriend had been seen near the scene, while others whispered about strangers passing through town. These hushed conversations shaped perceptions, creating invisible walls of suspicion around anyone unfamiliar. The town's silence was punctuated by the low hum of uncertainty. Law enforcement noticed how quickly suspicion spread, and they knew that misinformation could derail the investigation. Detectives interviewed residents multiple times, comparing statements for inconsistencies. Each account revealed subtle details: a shadow flitting behind a fence, a car parked where it shouldn't be, footsteps crunching over fresh snow. These fragments, while unreliable alone, gradually formed a mosaic of that night. Inside homes, families spoke in hushed tones, questioning the safety of streets they once considered harmless. Children were kept indoors, windows closed tight against the cold, and neighbors peeked from behind curtains, eyes scanning for anomalies. The collective unease had transformed the town's familiar streets into corridors of suspicion. At the local diner, conversations were punctuated by sudden silences when the topic shifted to the disappearance. Residents exchanged theories quietly, weighing every fragment of information. Some believed in foul play, others in an accident, but all were aware that the truth was buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. Each whispered opinion seemed to push the town further into paranoia. Investigators also encountered the subtle influence of fear on memory. Witnesses recalled seeing different things, depending on how conversations had unfolded before. A neighbor who had initially reported nothing unusual later described a shadowy figure influenced by the growing tide of rumor. This phenomenon complicated the investigation, blurring the line between fact and fear. The town's police department set up a hotline, hoping residents would come forward with information. Tips arrived in waves, some credible, many not. Each call was meticulously logged, analyzed for patterns, and cross-referenced with physical evidence. Even false leads had value, revealing the psychological landscape surrounding the case and hinting at possible motivations. Media coverage amplified the tension. Local news outlets highlighted the mystery, while national programs picked up fragments of the story, casting the town under an unflinching spotlight. Residents reported feeling watched, not just by journalists, but by invisible eyes that seemed to track every movement. The whispers, once private, had become part of a much larger narrative. Community meetings turned into sessions of controlled hysteria. Law enforcement attempted to maintain calm, providing updates and urging patience. But each revelation, minor or major, reignited speculation. Maps of the neighborhood were examined in public forums, footprints in the snow discussed, and theories debated with a mix of hope and fear. Psychologists later noted that the town's collective anxiety was predictable. A sudden violent event in a small community triggers heightened alertness, overinterpretation of minor cues, and a search for meaning where none exists. This psychological tension, while invisible, became a persistent character in the unfolding story, shaping behavior and influencing the investigation. At night, the whispers grew louder, carried along icy streets and alleyways. Conversations paused as someone passed by, eyes darting, hearts racing. Even those not directly connected to the case felt a creeping dread, the sensation that the unknown lurked just beyond view. Every shadow became a question mark, every sound a clue or a threat. The investigators understood that these whispers, though intangible, could lead to tangible evidence. Residents who were too frightened to come forward initially later provided critical information: fleeting sightings, unfamiliar vehicles, and hints about conversations that took place days before the disappearance. These seemingly minor details would later prove invaluable. The town's fear was a prism, refracting the mystery into countless versions of the truth. Each whisper carried its own angle, its own interpretation of the night's events. The investigators had to separate signal from noise, discerning the facts hidden beneath layers of rumor, assumption, and anxiety. By the end of that tense week, it became clear that the whispers were not just background noise. They were markers of human behavior, traces left in fear that could illuminate the path to discovery. The town, gripped by uncertainty, had unknowingly recorded parts of the story in its own reactions, observations, and apprehensions. Might the murmurs of the townspeople at last lead investigators to the truths buried beneath the snow? Let us guide you into what no one expected. The ex-boyfriend everyone blamed. From the very beginning, one name echoed louder than any other in hushed conversations: the victim's ex-boyfriend. Townspeople whispered about their last heated argument, speculating on whether anger had escalated beyond words. His presence in her life had ended months earlier, yet in the eyes of the community, old grievances never faded. Detectives approached him cautiously. His statements were precise but guarded, revealing only fragments of that night. Every pause, every glance became scrutinized under the microscope of suspicion. While there was no immediate evidence linking him to the disappearance, circumstantial details made him an unavoidable figure in the unfolding investigation. Friends and family painted contrasting portraits of the man. Some described him as caring yet volatile, others as distant and detached. These conflicting perceptions complicated the case, blurring the line between instinctive fear and factual observation. Each recollection carried weight, but none could conclusively solve the puzzle. The ex-boyfriend's routine was examined meticulously. Phone records, work logs, and social interactions were mapped to pinpoint his movements that evening. Investigators discovered gaps and overlaps, moments that required deeper investigation. Even the most mundane activities, like a stop at a gas station, were now dissected for hidden significance. Community opinion fueled media coverage. Headlines highlighted the tension between past relationships and present mysteries. Every social media post, every whispered accusation amplified public scrutiny, placing pressure on investigators to act with both speed and caution. The town's fascination with the ex-boyfriend became both a distraction and a guidepost in the case. Detectives interviewed those closest to him, uncovering inconsistencies that had been overlooked initially. One friend mentioned seeing him unusually agitated. Another insisted he was elsewhere entirely. Each testimony was carefully cross-referenced, revealing subtle patterns and anomalies. While nothing proved guilt, the threads formed a tapestry of human behavior that could not be ignored. Investigators also looked into his history, tracing minor incidents that reflected his temperament. Arguments, sudden outbursts, and fleeting conflicts painted a picture of someone capable of intense emotion but not necessarily of violence. Context became critical. A pattern of tension did not equal a pattern of crime, yet it warranted thorough examination. The ex-boyfriend's vehicle was another focal point. Tire tracks in the snow were compared against his car's tread, and early forensic analysis revealed nothing conclusive. Yet the presence of his car in proximity to certain neighborhoods prompted further exploration. Even innocent movements took on ominous weight in the shadow of a disappearance. Neighbors recalled seeing him near familiar haunts days before the incident, a subtle reminder that past relationships often intersect with present lives. While these sightings offered no proof, they fueled both concern and investigation. The delicate balance between suspicion and evidence became the daily challenge for detectives. Psychological profiling suggested that obsession or resentment might explain certain behaviors, but investigators knew that assumptions were dangerous. They needed tangible proof. This tension between human instinct and empirical evidence shaped the investigation, influencing every decision made by law enforcement. At the local cafe, whispers about him persisted, creating an invisible wall around the investigation. People discussed his demeanor, speculated on his whereabouts, and debated potential motives. Each fragment of conversation was recorded, analyzed, and treated as a possible clue. The collective anxiety of a small town became intertwined with the investigative process. Despite the intense scrutiny, the ex-boyfriend maintained an air of composure. His cooperation was voluntary but cautious, and every answer he provided was evaluated for consistency against forensic findings and eyewitness accounts. The dance between suspicion and fact continued, a delicate negotiation in the cold winter landscape. Investigators began to recognize the influence of public perception on their case. Rumors shaped what witnesses reported, and each accusation required careful separation from verifiable evidence. The ex-boyfriend was both a person of interest and a symbol of the community's collective anxiety, a reminder that human narratives can both illuminate and obscure the truth. As the days progressed, law enforcement continued to piece together timelines, comparing every minute of activity against available data. Even small contradictions became critical leads, prompting further questioning and analysis. The tension between patience and urgency defined each investigative move. Ultimately, while suspicion clung to him like frost to branches, evidence alone would decide his role in the mystery. The ex-boyfriend's story, intertwined with that of the missing woman, became an essential piece of a larger puzzle that no one yet fully understood. Is it possible that the secrets surrounding the ex-boyfriend will finally surface through the layers of rumor and fear? Stay here as the next twist unfolds. The silence that lasted a decade. The town had waited, year after year, for a sign, any sign, that the missing woman might be found. Streets that had once carried ordinary sounds of life grew quieter with each passing winter, the absence of closure echoing through empty homes and frozen yards. Families spoke less openly, a hushed tension hanging in conversations. Investigators revisited old evidence repeatedly, each time hoping that fresh eyes might reveal something previously overlooked. Every detail, from a discarded glove to a faint scuff on a stair railing, was meticulously documented. Over time, the case files grew thick, but the answers remained stubbornly out of reach. Years of silence had created both frustration and determination. Detectives developed new protocols for reviewing cold cases, employing forensic advancements that hadn't existed at the time of her disappearance. DNA technology had progressed, data storage had improved, and analytical tools offered new perspectives on old evidence. Each innovation brought the possibility of breakthroughs that once seemed impossible. For the family, silence became a living thing. Every unanswered question, every dead-end lead added weight to their grief. Birthdays passed without celebration, holidays were overshadowed by memory, and the absence of answers transformed ordinary moments into constant reminders of loss. Their patience was both heroic and heartbreaking. Community interest waned and resurged in cycles. At times, the story dominated local headlines. At others, it was reduced to a footnote, remembered only by those closest to the case. The ebb and flow of public attention influenced investigators' strategies, reminding them that human memory and emotion could shape even the most methodical inquiries. Only when detectives compared the early investigations with recent data did patterns begin to emerge. Small inconsistencies in witness statements, minor differences in physical evidence, and previously overlooked anomalies started to reveal a clearer picture. Silence, it appeared, had safeguarded secrets that hasty analysis might have overlooked. Meanwhile, the town itself had transformed. New businesses, new residents, and changing landscapes altered the context of the case. Streets that had once been familiar to investigators were now unfamiliar, snow-covered alleys replaced by construction or new sidewalks. Each shift required a reorientation of perspective, reminding the team that the passage of time could both conceal and reveal. Experts in cold case investigation emphasized patience. Evidence might lie dormant for years, but modern forensics could turn a forgotten trace into a revelation. The key was careful documentation, repeated analysis, and an understanding that the human element, memory, perception, and emotion was as critical as any physical clue. The decade of silence had created an almost mythical aura around the case. Locals recounted fragments of conversations and sightings with reverence, their stories blending observation with speculation. Every narrative became a reflection of fear, hope, and the enduring mystery that had gripped the community. Law enforcement remained vigilant. Even in years with no new tips, officers continued to follow up on minor leads, revisiting neighborhoods, re-interviewing witnesses, and re-examining forensic material. Their persistence, though largely invisible to the public, kept the investigation alive. The victims' personal items, preserved in evidence lockers, were revisited repeatedly. Fibers, traces of fabric, and minute particles collected from the scene were analyzed using new techniques. Even decades-old evidence carried the potential to unlock answers once thought lost, and investigators approached each sample with renewed focus. Amid their private grief, family members sometimes offered insights that only they could provide. Recollections of conversations, daily routines, and subtle behaviors added context to the evidence, uncovering patterns outsiders might have overlooked. Their willingness to help reflected resilience and hope in the face of prolonged uncertainty. As each winter passed, the town's collective memory of the missing woman shifted. Children grew up hearing about the mystery, adults spoke more cautiously, and the streets themselves seemed to absorb the tension. Silence, it became clear, was not merely absence, but a repository of unresolved questions waiting for discovery. For detectives, the decade of quiet offered lessons in diligence, patience, and the necessity of revisiting old assumptions. Every abandoned lead, every unexamined shadow of a detail could become pivotal. The silence that once frustrated investigators now provided clarity, a chance to examine what had been overlooked with the benefit of hindsight. The town's frozen landscapes had witnessed 10 years of unspoken truths, lingering questions, and the persistent determination of those who refused to let the case fade. Each snow-covered street, each silent neighborhood held pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. After 10 years of unanswered questions, the breakthrough that changed everything was closer than anyone realized. Stay with us to know. A phone frozen in time. The victim's phone had remained untouched for years, locked in an evidence bag, and cataloged as a potential treasure trove of information. In 2010, the device's capabilities were limited, but in the decade that followed, technological advancements transformed it into a key piece of the investigation. Every pixel, every timestamp became a window into her final hours. Forensic analysts approached the device with both caution and anticipation. Specialized software extracted call logs, text messages, and even deleted files that had long seemed irretrievable. Each fragment of data offered a snapshot of her interactions, revealing moments of routine, concern, and urgency. Even the most mundane messages now carried hidden significance. One early discovery shocked the team, a set of numbers dialed repeatedly yet never answered. Investigators speculated on the identity of the unseen recipient. Was it a friend who had tried to help, or someone whose intentions were less innocent? The unanswered calls became a haunting echo, frozen in time, silently documenting the night's tension. Battery records provided additional clues. The phone had lost charge in irregular intervals, suggesting periods of movement and activity. Cross-referencing this data with known locations offered a timeline that, while incomplete, was remarkably precise. Every detail chipped away at the fog of uncertainty surrounding her disappearance. Even deleted messages proved informative. Analysts recovered texts that revealed fleeting plans, hints of unease, and conversations that had ended abruptly. Small phrases, seemingly innocuous at the time, were now scrutinized for hidden meaning, tone, and timing. Each word was a clue, each punctuation a potential insight into her state of mind. By examining the phone's GPS data, investigators uncovered valuable leads. While the 2010 technology lacked the precision of today's systems, the location pings provided rough coordinates that verified some witness accounts and challenged others. Each discrepancy demanded careful scrutiny, since even a small misalignment could expose a previously unnoticed route or hidden encounter. The forensic team examined apps and call patterns that had gone unnoticed. Social interactions, contacts rarely used, and even browsing history contributed to a picture of her final movements. Digital breadcrumbs, when assembled correctly, began forming a pathway through the night, revealing choices made under duress. One particularly revealing moment involved a call that lasted mere seconds. Analysts determined the timing coincided with a faint movement recorded on nearby surveillance cameras. This synchronization suggested that someone had attempted to communicate under duress, or perhaps was being deliberately intercepted. The interplay of digital and physical evidence became a focal point for investigators. Those closest to the victim, upon learning of the phone's data, felt a wave of relief intertwined with renewed anxiety. Relief that progress had been achieved, anxiety over the implications of the recovered information. Even after 10 years, emotions flared with each new revelation, underscoring how deeply personal and human the investigation remained. Detectives mapped every interaction against the timeline constructed from other evidence, footprints, witness statements, and neighborhood observations. The convergence of these data points revealed patterns previously invisible, illuminating not just where she had been, but also who may have been near her. Technology, once a secondary tool, had become a guiding force in the search for truth. Experts noted that old devices often preserve information in ways modern users may overlook. Call durations, deleted contacts, and minor app activity leave traces that persist, sometimes silently documenting critical events. In this case, a decade-old phone had become a window into moments that had vanished from memory. The phone also held subtle hints about her intentions that night. Outgoing messages reflected attempts at coordination, snippets of routine life, and, in hindsight, possible pleas for assistance. Each recovered text painted a portrait of a woman caught between normalcy and danger, her final decisions preserved in circuits and memory chips. Investigators were particularly struck by the timing of certain calls. Gaps in activity suggested interruptions, diversions, or confrontations that had left no other trace. These intervals, while brief, became central to reconstructing the timeline of her disappearance. Even the simplest element of the device, battery life, charging patterns, or notification logs, was analyzed for insight. A phone frozen in time became a silent witness, providing clues where human memory faltered. Each signal, each ping, brought the investigation one step closer to bridging a decade of uncertainty. The breakthrough came when a rarely used contact matched a trace found on physical evidence at the scene. Suddenly, the phone was no longer just a relic of the past, but a key unlocking new directions in the case. Every call, text, and location ping converged to point toward individuals previously overlooked. As the phone revealed its secrets, investigators inched closer to answers that had been hidden for 10 years. Stay with us as the secrets grow even darker. The Man Who Lingered in the Shadows. From the first night of the disappearance, there had been whispers about a man seen near the victim's neighborhood. No one knew his name, yet his presence was recalled by multiple residents. Fleeting glimpses through windows, a figure moving against the wind, and shadows that seemed to hesitate when noticed. He became a phantom, both a suspect and a mystery. Local reports became the focus for detectives as they worked to piece together a timeline of his movements. Every account, no matter how brief, portrayed someone who watched more than he acted, someone who stayed on the edges. His behavior hinted at an intimate knowledge of the town, aware of its hidden corners and seldom used paths. Surveillance footage offered tantalizing clues. Grainy images captured a man whose posture and gait matched witness descriptions. Yet the images were never clear enough for immediate identification. Analysts studied every frame, slowing movement, enhancing contrast, and overlaying trajectories with footprints found in snow-covered alleys. Each pixel became a puzzle piece in the hunt for truth. Neighbors recalled hearing footsteps at odd hours, doors closing softly, and whispers carried by wind that seemed out of place. While no one confronted him directly, the repeated sightings created unease. The man in the shadows became a symbol of tension, representing what could not be easily explained in a town already haunted by uncertainty. Investigators examined his possible connections to the victim. While there was no clear relationship, proximity alone made him a person of interest. Background checks revealed a transient history, temporary employment, and previous minor offenses. Nothing conclusive, but enough to warrant caution. Each detail was logged and cross-referenced against other evidence. Interviews with local store clerks and passers-by provided fragments of information. One recalled a man lingering near the victim's last known location days before her disappearance. Another described seeing him near the wooded path where footprints were later found. Each testimony added nuance, revealing patterns of presence and avoidance. Investigators observed that the man's actions reflected patience and careful attention. He moved without haste, avoided drawing notice, and appeared conscious of any observers. Traits once dismissed as ordinary were now seen as signs of someone skilled at staying unnoticed. In a small town, such invisibility could serve as a significant advantage. The shadows themselves seemed to play a role. Nighttime conditions, drifting snow, and weak streetlights created natural concealment. Yet even in darkness, investigators could trace moments where movement disrupted snow, leaving impressions and subtle indicators of passage. Each disturbance told a story, revealing a methodical and deliberate presence. Forensic analysis of the footprints suggested someone who had paused repeatedly, as if weighing options or surveying the surroundings. Investigators compared stride, pressure, and alignment against known suspects, seeking a match that could place him at the scene beyond doubt. Even subtle variations in steps could become critical evidence. Witness statements described an unnerving stillness in his posture, a way of blending into the environment without becoming part of it. The man seemed to observe, not participate, yet every observation he made left traces that investigators would later decipher. In the absence of action, his presence spoke volumes. Speculation about him within the community grew louder. Some insisted he had vanished from town immediately after the disappearance, while others believed he remained nearby, unseen but present. Authorities had to carefully distinguish fact from rumor, sifting through fear and conjecture to uncover the truth. At the same time, investigators began charting possible routes he might have taken. Every alley, side street, and wooded trail was compared with witness statements, footprints, and GPS data from the victim's phone. By combining these sources, detectives were able to narrow their search and focus on individuals who fit his profile. Psychological profiling suggested someone who observed before acting, someone who could exploit human blind spots. This insight reshaped the investigation, highlighting the importance of presence, patience, and subtlety over overt action. Shadows once ignored now held vital significance. The man's existence in the investigation became more than just a lead. He was a lens through which detectives viewed the night's events, interpreting pauses, hesitations, and silences as evidence. Each shadow he cast was a question, each step a potential answer waiting to be confirmed. The combination of eyewitness accounts, digital evidence, and physical traces slowly began to coalesce. For years he had lurked in uncertainty, a silent figure in the narrative. Now, every detail gathered from the snow, the phone, and the town's observations pointed investigators toward uncovering who he really was. As shadows revealed their secrets, the figure long unseen came closer to the light. Stay close as the layers continue to peel back. The confession that lied. Months after the breakthrough with the bracelet, the case took an unexpected turn when a local man came forward claiming knowledge of the crime. His statement was detailed, filled with the kind of specifics that investigators typically associate with first-hand experience. Yet something about his story felt off, and detectives approached it with both hope and skepticism. At first, the confession provided clarity. He described routes, objects, and interactions that seemed to corroborate known evidence, including the footprints, the bracelet, and even minor discrepancies in the timeline. For a moment, it seemed the case might finally be closing. Investigators held their breath as they began verifying each claim. However, subtle inconsistencies soon emerged. Names of streets were slightly altered, sequences of actions contradicted surveillance data, and certain physical evidence didn't match his narrative. Every confirmation revealed new discrepancies elsewhere. Experts reminded the team that confessions are not automatically reliable. Human memory is imperfect, and some individuals lie for attention, fear, or misdirected loyalty. Despite these warning signs, the confession demanded careful attention. Investigators dissected each sentence, cross-checking with witness statements, digital evidence, and physical traces. Even a false confession can contain kernels of truth, and the team was determined to separate fact from fabrication. Managing the community's reaction became another challenge for detectives. Word of a confession traveled quickly, sparking renewed hope for closure. Families and neighbors approached the news with cautious optimism, yet investigators understood that embracing the story too soon could compromise the pursuit of real evidence. The tension between public expectation and investigative precision was starkly apparent. One peculiar detail raised suspicion. The man described finding an item at the scene, claiming it as proof of his involvement. When investigators located the item, its placement and condition contradicted his account entirely. It became clear that while he had some knowledge of the case, certain claims were fabricated, possibly based on rumors or media coverage rather than personal experience. The confession also revealed psychological complexity. Analysts considered why someone would step forward with a false narrative. Motives ranged from guilt to attention-seeking or even an attempt to mislead investigators. Understanding intent became as crucial as evaluating the accuracy of details, providing insight into the confession's construction and potential utility. Forensic teams revisited evidence cited in the confession. Fibers, DNA traces, and other minute details were re-examined with fresh eyes. While the confession did not directly solve the case, it prompted deeper scrutiny of overlooked elements. Investigators discovered subtle connections between items and locations previously underestimated, indirectly advancing the investigation. Interviews were conducted with deliberate caution by law enforcement. Witnesses recounted interactions with the man, highlighting discrepancies between what they observed and his version of events. By cross-referencing these accounts, investigators uncovered patterns of exaggeration and misrepresentation, emphasizing the importance of thorough, methodical verification. The media's portrayal of the confession complicated matters further. Sensational headlines suggested imminent resolution, which increased pressure on detectives to act swiftly yet accurately. Balancing public expectation with investigative integrity became a constant challenge, highlighting the delicate relationship between evidence, perception, and narrative. Even within the police department, opinions were divided. Some officers argued that the confession, despite flaws, offered valuable insight into potential suspects or overlooked locations. Others emphasized skepticism, urging focus on tangible evidence rather than a narrative constructed from hearsay. The debate underscored the tension inherent in long-term investigations. Analysts also studied behavioral patterns. The man's knowledge of the case suggested he had been paying attention for years, observing public records, media coverage, and community discussions. While he had no direct involvement, his ability to imitate details convincingly demonstrated the complexity of human memory and the danger of relying solely on confessions without corroboration. Eventually, investigators concluded that the confession was largely false, though it inadvertently led to renewed examination of critical areas. Locations, items, and minor clues that had been overlooked were revisited, ultimately bringing fresh leads to light. Even deception, it seemed, could propel the search for truth. The confession's unraveling reminded detectives of the fragile nature of information in high-profile cases. Rumors, memories, and false statements can intersect in ways that obscure reality, demanding vigilance, patience, and rigorous verification. In a case frozen in time for years, every step required measured precision. The false confession had misled many, but it also shone light on overlooked paths. Follow us as the untold details rise to light. DNA that spoke from the grave. For years, investigators relied on footprints, eyewitness accounts, and a phone frozen in time, but the breakthrough that finally shifted the case came from an unexpected source. A trace of DNA, preserved despite a decade of cold winters and changing seasons. The sample was tiny, nearly invisible, yet its significance was monumental. The DNA originated from a fragment of fabric recovered near the bracelet buried beneath the pines. Initial tests in 2010 had revealed nothing conclusive. Technology at the time lacked the sensitivity to extract a viable profile from such a compromised sample. But advancements in forensic genetics had changed the game. Analysts employed high-resolution sequencing techniques capable of recovering genetic material even from trace amounts, giving new life to evidence that had long been considered inert. When the first profile came back, detectives were stunned. It matched an individual previously under scrutiny, but never definitively linked to the case. This revelation ignited renewed investigative energy. Every previous lead, every overlooked detail was re-examined in light of this genetic confirmation. The DNA was more than a clue. It was a bridge connecting the past to the present. The discovery prompted investigators to revisit old crime scene photos, maps, and evidence logs. Every scrap of paper, every digital record was scrutinized for connections that had previously gone unnoticed. Analysts cross-referenced the DNA findings with footprints, phone location data, and even the confession that had misled the investigation months earlier. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Timing emerged as a crucial factor for detectives. Although the DNA had just been recovered, it had actually been deposited a decade earlier, preserved by the snow, cold, and soil. Its survival highlighted both the role of natural conditions and the careful handling of evidence. Determining precisely when and how it was left became essential to reconstructing the events of that night. Laboratory experts analyzed the genetic material for more than identity. They examined the type of cells present, revealing subtle details about the interaction with the scene. Skin cells on the bracelet suggested handling at multiple points, while fibers embedded in the soil indicated contact with clothing or movement across the area. Each microscopic clue added layers to the story. This genetic breakthrough forced investigators to reconsider previous assumptions. Individuals previously dismissed as peripheral were now under closer scrutiny. A suspect who had once seemed only tangentially connected suddenly became central, and every minor observation about him, his presence in town, movements near the pines, inconsistencies in alibis, gained renewed weight. DNA evidence also helped clear innocence. The ex-boyfriend, long subjected to suspicion, had no connection to the sample, offering a long-awaited reprieve from community speculation. This shift in focus highlighted the precision and objectivity of modern forensic science, where tangible evidence could finally override years of rumor and bias. Forensic analysts then mapped the DNA findings against other physical evidence, including footprints, tire tracks, and the phone's movement logs. They discovered intersections that had been invisible a decade ago, subtle overlaps between locations, timings, and interactions, all corroborated by the genetic data. Each intersection strengthened the emerging narrative of the night's events. The victim's family received the news with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Relief that the investigation had moved closer to answers, trepidation over what the genetic evidence implied about the perpetrator. Even after 10 years, the weight of the discovery was emotionally overwhelming, bringing both hope and fear in equal measure. Community members were stunned. News outlets heralded the breakthrough, reigniting public interest and scrutiny. Conversations shifted from speculation to fact-based discussion. People who had once whispered rumors now followed developments with cautious optimism, aware that tangible evidence had replaced conjecture. The DNA profile ultimately led investigators to a suspect whose presence in the area had been noted repeatedly over the years. Footprints, vehicle sightings, and behavioral patterns aligned with the genetic findings. Investigators coordinated surveillance, interviews, and background checks, finally constructing a comprehensive profile grounded in undeniable evidence. Even in the lab, experts marveled at the precision modern genetics allowed. Where once a tiny, degraded fragment would have been dismissed, the technology now extracted enough information to identify individuals and link them to specific items and locations. This capability transformed the investigation from a series of conjectures to a science-driven pursuit of truth. Meticulous reconstruction of the suspect's movements on the night of the disappearance became the next focus for law enforcement. The DNA confirmed not only his presence, but also suggested contact with the bracelet and nearby surroundings. Footprints revealed pauses and deliberate concealment, while soil analysis indicated he had handled objects later recovered. Together, these details created a clear map of intent and opportunity. The breakthrough also reshaped the investigation's psychological approach. Profilers analyzed the suspect's possible motives, combining behavioral science with tangible evidence. Patterns emerged: premeditation, calculated concealment, and knowledge of the victim's habits. The DNA had unlocked not just identity, but insight into actions, timing, and strategy. With the genetic link established, detectives were finally able to pursue arrest warrants with confidence. Every prior observation, from fleeting shadows to whispered rumors, suddenly fit into a cohesive story. The missing decade of answers had been bridged by a strand of DNA, a single trace that spoke louder than years of speculation. This discovery marked the turning point. What had once been a cold trail, frozen in uncertainty, now pulsed with clarity, momentum, and direction. Investigators could move decisively, armed with evidence that could withstand scrutiny and bring the perpetrator to justice. Had the evidence, silent for a decade, finally found its voice, demanding accountability? Stay with us, because the biggest revelation is still ahead. The arrest that tore off the mask. The morning of the arrest began quietly, almost deceptively ordinary. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the streets with a pristine layer that made every step audible. Detectives approached the suspect's residence with deliberate precision, mindful that years of evasion had honed his awareness and instincts. One misstep could mean lost opportunity. Inside the home, signs of normal life belied the weight of suspicion. Personal belongings were arranged with care, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke. Yet investigators noted subtle anomalies: worn pathways leading to hidden corners, items out of place, and evidence of careful concealment. Each observation reinforced the theory of premeditation and awareness of scrutiny. The suspect, when confronted, initially maintained calm. His demeanor was composed, almost eerily so, a mask that had protected him for years. He answered questions briefly, deflecting and controlling interactions, testing the boundaries of authority. Yet the weight of evidence, particularly the DNA and corroborated details of the bracelet and footprints, left no room for evasion. With tactical precision, detectives carried out the arrest. The community had speculated about his role for years, yet few anticipated the exactness of law enforcement's operation. Witnesses observed from afar, unaware that the climax of a decade-long investigation was taking place. The arrest was understated, yet deeply consequential. The suspect's personal history became a focal point during questioning. Previous offenses, minor in isolation, now formed patterns consistent with observation, stalking, and manipulative behavior. Behavioral analysts highlighted these patterns, noting how repeated avoidance of authority and subtle misdirection suggested someone accustomed to concealing intentions. Investigators meticulously documented every action, ensuring that the arrest would withstand scrutiny in court. Evidence collected over 10 years, DNA, the bracelet, digital traces, witness statements, converged to create an irrefutable chain linking the suspect to the disappearance. Every previous misstep, overlooked clue, and unanswered question now served as pillars supporting the case. Community response was immediate. Families, neighbors, and local media grappled with the reality that someone who had blended seamlessly into daily life had been responsible. Fear, relief, and vindication coexisted in the public consciousness. The arrest shattered assumptions, revealing how carefully the perpetrator had hidden in plain sight. Forensic teams returned to the collected evidence to prepare for prosecution. What had once been analyzed in fragments now formed a cohesive story. DNA on the bracelet, footprints in the snow, and digital traces from the victim's phone aligned to establish a timeline, placing the suspect at key moments during the disappearance. The narrative had become undeniable. Consulting psychologists highlighted the role of control in the suspect's actions. Years of evasion, careful observation, and manipulation of perception revealed a methodical mind at work. The facade of normalcy had been a deliberate shield designed to pass casual scrutiny while masking intent. The arrest initiated the dismantling of that carefully maintained barrier. Investigators turned their focus to the suspect's movements in the days following the disappearance. Surveillance footage, neighborhood accounts, and minor interactions all matched the timeline created by DNA and physical evidence. The emerging patterns revealed a blend of strategic calculation and human error, proving that even careful concealment inevitably leaves traces. Interviews gradually uncovered layers of deception. Early statements conflicted with long-established evidence, and attempts to downplay involvement were systematically disproven through forensic analysis. Detectives emphasized these contradictions, showing that the suspect's mask was both figurative and functional, a method of controlling perception and the investigative process itself. Attention in the community shifted from speculation to concrete understanding. As details of the arrest became public, neighbors recalled small incidents in a new context, brief sightings, unexplained movements, and subtle interactions that had once seemed trivial. Each anecdote now held significance, offering a window into the suspect's tactics and presence. Media outlets framed the arrest as both shocking and inevitable. Headlines captured the tension, decades of silence, and the sudden arrival of truth. Journalists highlighted the precision of law enforcement, the determination of investigators, and the scientific advancements that made the breakthrough possible. For the victim's family, emotions were complicated and intertwined. Relief, grief, and vindication surfaced as they absorbed the reality. The person responsible had finally been identified. The arrest marked a turning point not only legally but emotionally, providing the long-sought closure that had seemed impossible for 10 years. Throughout processing, law enforcement meticulously documented statements, tracked evidence handling, and ensured strict adherence to procedure. This careful attention reflected lessons learned over years when even small mistakes could jeopardize the case. The arrest symbolized more than justice. It represented the culmination of patience, discipline, and strategic planning. The suspect's demeanor began to shift as the implications of the arrest sank in. Attempts to maintain composure faltered under relentless questioning and incontrovertible evidence. Even his carefully constructed mask could not withstand the weight of scientific proof combined with a decade of investigative diligence. With the arrest complete, investigators prepared for trial. Every element of the case, DNA, digital evidence, physical traces, eyewitness accounts, and prior confessions would be presented to reveal the full extent of the crime. The arrest was only the beginning of the final chapter, where truth would confront deception in a court of law. Had the mask finally fallen, revealing secrets that had been hidden in plain sight all along? Come with us to explore the hidden corners of the story. Justice in the dead of winter. The courtroom was silent as the trial commenced, a stark contrast to the chaos of speculation and rumor that had swirled for over a decade. Snow fell steadily outside, blanketing the town in a cold, still silence that mirrored the gravity of the proceedings. Every seat was filled with those desperate for resolution, eager to witness justice finally unfold. The prosecution opened with meticulous care, presenting evidence collected over 10 long years. DNA from the bracelet, preserved despite time and weather, was introduced first. Every forensic expert emphasized its significance, explaining how even minute traces had definitively linked the suspect to the crime. The courtroom seemed to lean in with collective breath held. Footprints in frozen alleys were next, mapped against surveillance footage and the suspect's known movements. Each step was reconstructed, demonstrating intent, opportunity, and careful planning. Analysts illustrated how subtle miscalculations in his path had left behind traces that ultimately led investigators to the truth. The victim's phone became a central piece of evidence, its data logs painstakingly detailed. Texts, calls, and deleted messages reconstructed her last hours with chilling clarity. Patterns of communication, missed calls, and location data aligned with physical evidence, reinforcing the narrative that had eluded investigators for 10 years. Witness testimony added human depth. Friends, neighbors, and family described fleeting sightings, unusual behavior, and the enduring grief following her disappearance. Their voices reminded everyone present that the case was not merely about evidence, but about a life irrevocably altered. The defense attempted to cast doubt, focusing on gaps in memory, the passage of time, and possible contamination. Yet investigators anticipated these arguments, presenting detailed logs of chain of custody for each piece of evidence, demonstrating the integrity of the investigation. In court, psychologists detailed the suspect's behavior, explaining how observation, evasion, and deliberate concealment had enabled him to stay hidden for years. The courtroom felt the unsettling truth. Someone capable of such meticulous deception could move unnoticed, blending seamlessly into ordinary life. Prosecutors emphasized his prior attempts to mislead investigators, including the false confession that had diverted attention. They outlined how deception had been uncovered, reinforcing the methodical approach required to disentangle truth from manipulation. Every misleading step now served as evidence of intent. The trial also highlighted law enforcement's perseverance. Detectives recounted years of painstaking work, from revisiting old leads to employing cutting-edge forensic technology. The case became a testament to the intersection of patience, skill, and innovation, demonstrating that time, while challenging, could be overcome with dedication. As evidence unfolded before them, family members absorbed each detail. The trial served as both confirmation and confrontation. Old pain resurfaced, yet a sense of closure began to emerge. Every revelation and corroborated fact helped them piece together the full story they had waited a decade to comprehend. The courtroom became a place of reckoning, not just for the suspect, but for the shared memory of the entire community. When witnesses described the moment the bracelet was discovered beneath the pines, the weight of symbolism was palpable. What had once been a small, overlooked item became the tangible pivot of justice, connecting all strands of evidence into a coherent narrative. Science, patience, and chance had converged to illuminate what had remained in shadows for so long. The suspect's demeanor changed as the trial progressed. Confidence gave way to visible strain as details of his actions were laid out, step by step. His attempts to maintain composure faltered, revealing cracks in the carefully maintained mask that had concealed his guilt for years. The courtroom watched as years of evasion unraveled before them. Closing arguments crystallized the story of the night, connecting the DNA, phone, bracelet, footprints, and behavioral analysis into a coherent, undeniable account. Prosecutors emphasized the timeline, demonstrating both opportunity and premeditation. They reminded the jury that the evidence was not circumstantial, but a precise chain of facts, supported by both science and witness accounts. When the jury returned, the silence was almost unbearable. Each member had carried the weight of a decade-long investigation in their deliberations. The verdict, read aloud, confirmed what the evidence had already indicated. The perpetrator had been unmasked, his years of concealment defeated by relentless investigation and meticulous documentation. The town felt the impact immediately. Residents, who had lived with suspicion and fear for years, began to exhale collectively. Closure, though delayed, allowed families and community members to begin healing. Streets, once heavy with uncertainty, regained a sense of normalcy, though the memory of what had happened remained. At the conclusion of the trial, investigators recognized it as both a professional and emotional milestone. 10 years of investigation, painstaking evidence collection, and scientific innovation had culminated in justice. The case became a model for future cold cases, illustrating the power of persistence, technology, and attention to detail in solving crimes long thought unsolvable. As the snow continued to fall outside the courthouse, the symbolic weight of winter mirrored the story's conclusion. Where once silence, shadows, and deceit had dominated, now truth, accountability, and closure prevailed. The case, frozen in time for a decade, had finally thawed under the light of relentless pursuit. What intrigues you most about this Michigan case? The years-long concealment of evidence, the discovery of the bracelet beneath the pines, the false confession, the DNA breakthrough, the tense arrest, or the courtroom showdown that finally brought justice? Share your thoughts in the comments.